Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Claire and I'm the Head of Theatre Buildings at Theatres Trust, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, which is about theatres operations, specifically focusing on security and maintenance planning. Before we start, a little bit about Theatres Trust. We are the national advisory and advocacy body for theatres, and were established by an Act of Parliament in 1976 to protect and support all of the UK's theatres, and that's theatres whatever the size, operational model, and regardless of whether they are historically listed buildings or otherwise. The legislation is unique to the UK, and we are the only organisation empowered by law to support the whole theatre sector. Through our work, we champion the future of live performance and support theatre owners and operators to develop best practice in theatre building and management. How do we do this? We have an impartial advice service that draws on our in-house expertise as well as a pool of experts. We have grant-giving programmes that support theatres to be more inclusive, sustainable and fit for modern audiences and performances. We represent the interests of the theatre sector to local and national government, and we deliver capacity building programmes to support theatres. This webinar is part of a series for Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities, which is one of those capacity building programmes. It's a 3-year pilot programme funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, Pilgrim Trust and Swire Charitable Trust, and we are actually in the final year. Gosh, it's gone quickly. Previous webinars in the series have been about audience development, individual giving, governance and fundraising, among other topics, and you can view all recordings of these webinars in the series on our website. The link has just been posted in the chat for you, so please do go and take a look. The next webinar will be in the autumn, and we will share more details nearer the time via our website, newsletter and social media, so please do keep an eye out for that. Some quick housekeeping notes before we start. So as mentioned, this is part of a pilot project, and so we will be very grateful for all feedback. Shortly after the event, you will receive an email with a link to a short online survey, and we do promise it is short. We would really appreciate it if you could complete this and let us have your views on the webinar. Please can I ask you all to turn off your video and microphones during the event, and we do request that attendees keep these settings for the duration of the event, and that's so everybody can hear our speakers clearly and without interruption. We recommend that you choose side-by-side speaker view in order to see both the slides and the speakers. We are recording this event and we will be sharing a link to the edited video and slides with all attendees by the end of next week. We have enabled captioning on the webinar, and so if you'd like to make use of this, please select Live Transcript. That's a small CC button on your Zoom toolbar. And if you have any technical issues at all, please do use the chat box to send your message to Theatres Trust host directly, not to everyone, and a member of our team will do their very best to assist you. We're going to have around 30 minutes at the end for audience questions, and we invite you to type your comments and questions into the chat. Where relevant, please do indicate which speaker your query is directed at. But before I hand over to today's first speaker, a very quick introduction. So this webinar will provide us with an overview of the important role of those behind the scenes systems, processes and plans, which are also crucial to be able to effectively operate a thriving theatre building. We're going to start the webinar with a topic that I know you'll all be wanting to hear more about, Martyn's Law, and tips on what theatres of all sizes can start to think about now in preparation for a law that is coming into force in approximately 2 years' time. We're then going to hear from 2 theatres about developing theatre maintenance plans, which are so essential to the effective operation of theatres, but an area that can often be given less attention than it deserves. So, without further ado, let me introduce the first talk, which is jointly delivered by Sarah Denver and Juliet Hayes. Sarah runs Premises Protect Limited and also works as an independent consultant with the West End Security Group. In her previous role as a counter-terrorism security advisor with the Metropolitan Police Service, Sarah worked across some of London's biggest and iconic sites, including Premier League sports stadia, music venues, high-profile places of worship and national museums. So Sarah is going to provide a brief introduction to Martyn's Law, and then we'll be joined at the end by Juliet Hayes, the Risk and Sustainability Manager at the Society of London Theatre and UK Theatre. Juliet's going to offer a holistic view for theatre operators and offer tips for theatres who want to start preparing for the law before it comes into force. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, and thank you Theatres Trust for inviting Juliet and myself to come and speak to you today. I'm sure you've already heard about Martyn's Law. I'll just briefly give you the background for anybody who hasn't. So this was, it's been taken forward by a parent whose son was tragically killed in the Manchester Arena attack. That happened in 2017. And Fagan Murray has been campaigning for this law ever since, and it received royal assent in April this year. It's commonly called Martyn's Law, but it's actually called Terrorism, the Protection of Premises Act. And it forms part of the contest strategy, which is the government's strategy against terrorism, and it falls into the protect and prepare strands. So it's about protecting public premises and events and preparing them for such atrocities and to be able to reduce the impact of those types of events. The regulator for the SIA is going to the regulator for the law is going to be the SIA, and they're going to provide some guidance. So as Claire said earlier, it's still 2 years away before the law, at least 2 years until the law is going to be enforced, and there's a lot of guidance to come out of that, and the SIA will be providing that guidance. So we'll move on to whether you fall into scope for the law. So there's 2 tiers in Martyn's Law. One is standard tier, one is enhanced tier. The standard tier refers to premises, and that's where there's at least one building. So for example, a theatre, or a theatre within another building. So if you think something like a shopping centre that may have a store within, several stores within a larger building. And these premises are used wholly for what they call Schedule 1 activities. So Schedule 1 activities includes things like shops, venues, theatres, cinemas, restaurants, any museums, some education establishments, hospitals. So anything where really public, freely accessible places. You also fall into scope if your premises is expected to hold at least 200 people up to 799, and that's to be present at least occasionally. So that's not saying it's got to be at least 200 every single day, but you would reasonably expect that you would achieve between 799 individuals. And then to also be in scope, premises are not excluded under Schedule 2 of the Act. So we're going to discuss that a little bit later on. There's some small anomalies where premises will not be included in the Act. However, theatres, if you're 200 capacity or above, you will fall under standard tier. Next slide, please. So if you fall into scope, what is required? So the first thing you have to do is notify the SIA that your premises falls into the standard tier. And then you've got to implement something called public protection procedures. So this includes some procedures that are designed to reduce the risk of physical harm to individuals. So that would be having an evacuation plan, an evacuation plan, a lockdown plan, and how you communicate those plans. So I'll just cover off evacuation and lockdown. They sound the same. The action is very similar, but a lockdown is something that happens dynamically. It's quickly. It's to stop the threat entering your premises. Evacuation could be to keep people, it's a little bit slower time, but it's to keep people in the building from harm outside. So this could be something like a suspicious vehicle. It could be a leak outside and you've got to stay into your building. So it's a slight change, evacuation and lockdown, similar actions, but different reasons. There is no requirement in the standard tier to put in place any physical measures. So if anybody comes to you telling you need hostile vehicle mitigation, glazing, anything physical, there's no requirement under this law. Additionally, there is no events that fall into the standard tier. Events come into play in what we call the enhanced tier. So we'll move into what's out of scope, and this is what we call Schedule 2. So for premises, government buildings, they're already covered by legislation. Parks and gardens, they're not covered because they're very open, and it's hard to quantify really the people attending unless it's an event, which falls into events. And then we've got transport hubs, so they are already covered by transport legislation. Events held at places of worship and schools, they are out of scope. And other events on certain premises can be out of scope as well. As I say, there's further guidance that will sort of iron out some of these descriptions going forwards between now and 2027. Next slide, please. So the responsible person is the person that's required to meet the requirements of the law. So a responsible person in your premises is someone who has control of the premises in connection with their Schedule 1 use. So if that's a theatre manager who's in charge of that building, they are the responsible person. For example, in a shopping centre where you've got you could have a standard tier shop, they would have their own responsible person. They would be expected to coordinate and cooperate with the responsible person for the entire shopping centre. So there's a little bit of work to be done around those sorts of multi-use buildings. An event, the responsible person for an event is the person who will have control of the premises at which the event is to be held. So it does get a little bit more complicated, and events are only for businesses and events 800 capacity or above. So, for example, if we've got Hyde Park in London, an event in Hyde Park certainly reaches the threshold of 800. That would be considered an enhanced tier event. Now, it wouldn't be the people who run the park that would be responsible for that event. So something like, well, we've got British Summertime taking place at the moment. That would be an enhanced tier event, and the organisers of British Summertime would identify a responsible person for that event, and they would be responsible for those requirements. Next slide, please. So we've had the standard tier. The enhanced tier is 800 capacity or more, and this includes premises and qualifying events. So to be a qualifying event, you obviously need to reach 800, and the event will take place at a premises or land, as I've discussed, Hyde Park, that are not enhanced duty premises. If you're holding an event in an enhanced duty premises, the premises would take supremacy, if you understand what I mean. The responsible person for the premises would take over. The relevant premises are accessible to the members of the public for the purpose of the event. So for a theatre, that's what they're going for. And it's reasonable to expect there will be at least 800 individuals present for the event at once. So at the same point during the event. There will be measures in place to check entry. So this could be ticket checks. So that doesn't mean it has to be a paid event. It could be a free event as well. But as long as there's some requirement, a registration or something like that, that's in scope. And again, the event that if it's excluded under Schedule 2 of the Act, it's obviously not in scope. Next slide, please. So the requirements for enhanced tier premises and qualifying events. Because the attractiveness is greater, we've got more people, so it certainly makes it a more attractive target for terrorists. We've got the public protection procedures that were required in the standard tier, which is your evacuation plan, lockdown plan, and communications. But we've also got something called public protection measures. So this is where we're moving into the physical side of security. We'll just move on to the next slide, please. So public protection measures, you're required to have measures relating to monitoring of the premises. So that could be something like CCTV. You've got to have measures relating to the movement of individuals in and out of the premises. Also physical safety and security of the premises and the security of information related to those premises. So they're expected to reduce the physical harm and the likelihood if there was an attack. So, for example, glazing. I know a lot of theatres are listed buildings, so it's very challenging, but you can improve glazing to reduce the effects of a blast. And as part of this process, all of this is required to be documented and provided to the SIA. So that responsible person that's been identified would notify the SIA that you're an enhanced tier premise or a qualifying event, provide all the documentation about how they're monitoring the premises, monitoring individuals, what physical security measures you've got in place to reduce the impact and likelihood, and how the security of the information of the premises or event is held. That's documented and provided to the SIA, and this will all the documentation that you're required to fill in will come out between now and implementation of the law. Next slide, please. So the next steps, as I've just mentioned, there'll be the SIA looking to provide more guidance. We're looking at least 2 years for this to come in. And what I would be recommending, any businesses that are 200 plus capacity, or even 150, I think look towards the public protection procedures, which you've probably already got in place. Review them, just make sure they're fit for purpose now. Keep an eye out for the guidance that will come out from the Home Office and from SALT and UK theatres. And just keep a watching brief. If you're 800 and above, just have a review of your physical security measures. You don't need to implement anything now, but it's good practice to keep a review going of what security measures you've got in place, and if they're up to the job. You do not need to pay for any private consultancy work for this. The guidance that will come out from the Home Office will be easy enough to understand for somebody who's not security minded. Okay, there'll be also guidance from West End Security Group via SALT, but certainly please, there's a lot of companies that are touting Martyn's Law that will even now say that they'll make you ready for Martyn's Law. They can't possibly deliver, so please don't go off paying for any of that. There's absolutely no need. As WESG, West End Security Group, support Society of London Theatre with this, so we'll be continuing to work together until the law comes into place, so we can provide anything that's needed. There's also additional information and some really handy fact sheets on the gov.uk website on Martyn's Law if anybody wants to have a read up, and it breaks it down into responsible person, the standard tier, the enhanced tier, and what's required and what's not required. I'll hand over to Juliet.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be part of this webinar. I'm just going to talk very briefly about some of the work that SALT and UK Theatre are doing on this subject for our membership, but also, I would say, for the wider industry. Yes, we have to look after our members, but also I'm part of a number of safety and security meetings with other industry stakeholders, so we do share a lot of information. So something we're obviously starting to build our own strategy. So our risk and sustainability team, that's what I'm part of, I'm the manager there. We're continuing to adapt our support to meet the evolving needs of our members during this transition. We have been engaging with our membership for about 3 years on this subject in readiness. So now we are going to obviously move a little bit faster. Martyn's Law remains an agenda topic for all our member and stakeholder meetings, so regularly discussed. We have, last year we provided a Martyn's Law webinar for our members. We hosted information sharing sessions with NACSO, and we've also taken part and hosted meetings with the West End Security Group for doing tabletop exercises, which I found quite fun. It's nothing like a practice to start to understand where your vulnerabilities may lie, and any extra work that you may need to put into preparing your documentation. A lot of your documentation will already be prepared under health and safety laws, so hopefully it won't be too far a step for you to review your security arrangements, as Sarah said, to prepare. We regularly signpost our membership to updates on the Protect UK website, which provides free resources as well as online training. So the SCAN training and the ACT training has been free for many years and continues to be updated. So I would urge you, if you haven't done already, to familiarise yourself with the Protect UK website and all that it offers. We continue to work with NACSO, and I've started engaging with the SIA directly myself. Apparently, we are the first industry to engage with the SIA. Of course we are. We want to get ahead of the curve. And I think a lot of the whole industry has sadly been preparing for counter-terrorism measures since 7/7 in London. And so this isn't a new topic, but how we deliver it, we got to obviously wait for the guidance to come out from the Home Office and SIA, which I'm hoping will be, I've been given the idea that it might be later this year. Don't hold me to that, but we will see. So yes, we want to support the new regulator. I think I've had a lot of colleagues in the industry talk to me over recent months about we're very concerned that the SIA may not understand our industry and how we tick. And so I feel it's very much part of my remit to engage with them proactively and positively so that they don't just slap fines on us willy-nilly without understanding what we need to do to satisfy the criteria of the law. Next slide, please. So just briefly, some of the next steps that we're already working on and started to work more in detail on is we're advising everybody to prepare now, members and our non-members. Start preparing now. Engage with, if you haven't done already, engage with your local counterterrorism security advisor, your CTSA, and your local authority, particularly for those venues that are council owned. Hopefully they should be also preparing. Again, use the Protect UK website, but also the national, too many words, the National Protective Security Authority, the NPSA. They also provide free resources and training that will support you for this, being prepared for this law. For our membership, as I said, we've already done some focus webinars. We will probably plan to do more in the future. Also having particular forums. One thing that came up yesterday is we may have to develop a member forum for and create a Martyn's Law working group because of some challenging issues that have already been brought to our attention recently. Just to delve into that very slightly, for the enhanced tier, you heard from Sarah that physical measures will be expected. And one of those is hostile vehicle mitigation. As you all know, most of you don't own the pavements outside your venues. They are owned by the local authorities. So there's going to need to be a multi-agency approach to, and a risk rating approach to the installation of HVM or not. The cost can be quite significant, and we are starting a project to gather information from our membership about any quotes they've already had for installing HVM outside their venues. The concern is that councils want you to pay for it, and really the councils maybe should be sharing that cost or paying for it, particularly as we already pay business rates. So that is a topic that is very hot at the moment, and we will be supporting the industry and our membership on advocating for a fairer approach for our members and the industry. Other things we do is we develop focus newsletter updates where it's applicable. We're hoping to develop industry-specific guidance in conjunction with the SIA. I can't really talk about that. There's nothing to talk about at the moment, but that's our plan. There may be an upskilling of the risk and sustainability team, that's me, to provide competent advice under our member services offering. And also, we will, of course, be recommending suitable external providers where applicable that could provide support to the membership and the wider industry. One of those that I'm allowed to mention is RB, Richard Beale Health and Safety Solutions, who is qualified security professional. Now it's taken him 12 years to qualify, but he is working with the SIA and the awarding body who will be running a training scheme for security professionals for this particular law. So he didn't mind me mentioning in that, but he may be a great place to go to. And his organisation has a number of personnel working for him. It's not just one person, which is me. That's all. Thank you very much for listening. And I'll hand back to Claire.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Juliet and Sarah. I think it's a really useful overview for everybody in the room. Juliet, as you said, this is a challenge that affects the entire industry and it requires collaboration throughout, and we'll all be working together to support theatre and live performance venues. So that's Theatres Trust, with UK Theatre and other theatre bodies as well. So do look out for more information. And I'm sure there's going to be loads of questions for you at the end in our discussion. So now on to our second presentation, which is from Fiona Harvey-Jones of the Royal Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh. Fiona joined as Director of Estates and Facilities, a newly created role in June 2021 during the COVID pandemic. What a time to join an organisation, Fiona. Fiona is trained as an architect and has worked for several different architectural practices and estates environments in senior roles. Since joining the Royal Lyceum, Fiona has used her knowledge of buildings to develop the theatre's approach to building maintenance. Her talk is going to use a case study approach to share insights into how she has developed a strategic approach to maintenance planning for the Royal Lyceum. Over to you, Fiona.
Good afternoon. As Claire mentions, I'm Fiona Harvey-Jones, Director of Estates and Facilities at the Royal Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh. Next slide, please. So this is just a couple of views of the Lyceum Theatre, which is, next slide, please. It's a Grade A listed heritage building. The theatre was built in 1883. Having spent over 20 years working as an architect, I then spent about 4 years at the University of Edinburgh working in their estates department on capital projects and also strategies for their various campuses. I then, as Claire mentioned, started working at the theatre during COVID, when most people were either on furlough or working from home. So it was quite a strange experience coming into a building in which there were very few people. The building's manager was, however, on site, and he went onto site pretty much throughout the pandemic, just ensuring that the buildings were maintained. I felt at that time that it was a perfect period for doing maintenance, but of course, with the whole uncertainty around money and obviously restrictions on workers, not much was done at the Lyceum. And I very quickly realised that not much had been done at the Lyceum building since the 1990s. And also I realised that there was a very much make-do attitude towards building repairs. And this was primarily due to preconceptions about funds. Whilst the theatre has never really been very affluent, people were using a sticking plaster approach for things that probably have ended up costing more in the long run because they didn't get fully resolved straight away. Next slide, please. So the image that you can see on your screen is a type of makeshift system, which was in place in the theatre. We've got these throughout the building where people have cobbled something together to address a leak. We've got a lot of roof leaks in the building. When I arrived, there was actually a wheelie bin located in the gods with a funnel, which was to catch water coming through the roof. The wheelie bin would then fill up and the maintenance team would take it down 3 flights of stairs to empty it and then take it back up to fill it up again. So we have addressed that leak, and along with others. So I arrived, as I said, during COVID, but I also arrived at a time of organisational change. My role was a newly created senior role, which combines the buildings, lighting, sound, and stage teams. So the reasons for the role being created were to have someone in a higher level of authority who could push for the building maintenance and make sure that it was higher up on the priority list. It was also to have someone with an understanding of the importance of the historical buildings to oversee the teams working on stage, both from a health and safety perspective, but also from a building conservation perspective. So since being at the Lyceum, I've started to move from being reactive to strategic in the planning for the building maintenance. I have a 5-year plan mapped out, and I've got quotations from various building suppliers, and I used the building cost index for inflation to map out those costs throughout the 5-year period. The 5-year period originated as when I started, our leases were due to expire in 2027, which they still are. We're in the process of trying to renegotiate those leases. But that 5-year period took us up to the end of that lease when we're looking to do a capital works project. We have seen a marginal increase in the estate's budget. However, inflation has obviously impacted on the value of this. So what I've been doing is trying to review all of the contracts and all of our providers of maintenance services to get a better deal. So we're gradually working through these, and we have been very successful in reducing some of our annual service contract costs. I've taken a very cautious approach to utilities, which form a substantial amount within our budget. I signed up in 2021 to a deal up until 2027, and that avoided the price hikes. I mean, it was partly luck, but we became very safe quite quickly. I've just renewed those contracts to 2032 for the electricity, not the gas yet, but again, because of funds, I wanted the cost certainty. So since when I arrived in 2021, 2021, the budget was already set, and the scheduled maintenance budget for the theatre building was £8,000 for the entire year. So this year, that budget has gone up to £100,000. We also have a reactive maintenance budget, which has pretty much stayed at the same level of around £27,000 a year. Since I've been in post, we haven't overspent the estate's budget, and we have managed to do quite a lot. And I've been able to do that by reducing expenditure elsewhere, as I mentioned in the contracts, and just cutting back on things which really weren't necessary. We have in our plant rooms, we've got storage of hundreds of light fittings, and my understanding is that my predecessor used to buy equipment at the end of the year to make sure that he'd spent the budget, which is great for me because it's sitting there, but I'm trying to be doing more of the maintenance than buying kit. Next slide, please. So we have three sites across Edinburgh, and they're all owned by the council. So we have, unfortunately, maintenance and repair leases in place for all three of those buildings. We're funded by Creative Scotland, who are obviously primarily interested in the work we produce and also our community engagement. We also receive funding from the council. However, in the case of the lease for our office buildings, there's a clause in the lease which restricts us from using council funds on repairs on our buildings. Alongside our funders, a lot of our patrons are interested in the work we put on stage rather than our buildings. So there are these conflicting priorities there for our budget. I personally feel, as an architect, that the theatre buildings should be part of every production. A visit to the theatre for me is an immersive experience, which starts when you get ready for your visit. So sometimes for me, it feels a bit lonely in the senior management team, as my objectives for the buildings aren't always seen as a priority. However, I've found a couple of avenues which are quite useful when getting funds, one of which is sustainability and the other is accessibility. And actually, I've just thought of a third, which is obviously health and safety. So those always give me a bit of a driver for obtaining funds, because those are so important to everyone. As I mentioned, in real terms, our budgets haven't increased, but my analysis of where we're spending money has, and that's enabled us to spend money more productively. It is hard with limited funds to prioritise, though, when there's so much to do, but making the buildings wind and watertight and also safe and secure has always been my priority. Next slide, please. So we have started to see some progress, very baby steps. I have control of my budget, which is a great position to be in, because I can confidently reassign funds to pay for larger scale works. The image that you see there is us doing some painting. Part of our lease condition is that we regularly paint both the inside and the outside of the building, and that has been missed a little bit just due to lack of funds. So it was great this year when we got to do part of the foyer. And we've had lots of positive feedback from audience members on that. And you can see there the level of detail they're going in, because we are obviously a historic building. We've also reduced our emissions considerably, simply by being more aware and constantly reviewing things like timing for heating and cooling. And this obviously has impacted on costs as well, because we've reduced the amount that we're spending on our utilities. One great thing that we have is now operational foyer doors. When I started at the theatre, there's 6 sets of double doors into the foyer, and only about 1.5 of those sets were working. And they hadn't been operational for about 10 years, because people kept saying, well, we'll do a capital works project soon, so we don't want to do any works to the doors. It will be a waste of money. Well, the second year I was in position, I got those doors changed over, and now we have 6 sets of operational doors, which, although we haven't had direct feedback about them from audience members, the front of house team are ecstatic about now being able to welcome audience members through any door. Our financial year starts in April, and maintenance periods are often in July. So sometimes we struggle in that the budgets haven't quite been signed off, but we need to do the works. And in my position, I have been able to do those works. So the foyer works weren't completely signed off, but I knew that I wouldn't go over budget, or I very much thought I wouldn't, and I didn't. So I instructed those works ahead of the budgets being signed off. There's still loads to do. The roof could do with a complete overhaul, but we are addressing leaks as they happen. They are very frequent, but we've got a great contractor who is very proactive in coming and ensuring that the leaks are quickly attended to if they happen. So in terms of feedback from customers and customer satisfaction, I find that customers are often happier to lodge complaints about the buildings rather than to make positive comments. However, we do have a lot of patrons, and they have made remarks, as I said, about the painting that we've been doing. We did substantial plasterworks the first or second year I was in post, and those actually involved doing repairs, some of which had come up on our annual survey as being amber warning, which meant they needed to be done within 12 months, but they've been sitting on that list for about 3 or 4 years. So we're almost at a fully green list now. I think we did some substantial stuff this year as well, hence doing the painting, because we'd had the plasterwork repaired before then. I find that colleagues will constantly complain about the aesthetics of the building. However, from my point of view, we are barely at the stage of addressing those yet. We need to complete the works to the bones of the building first, and then I quite happily move on to the aesthetics. Next slide, please. So what is the future? So we are building a building fit for purpose. We want to be a sustainable and resilient organisation. We've gone through a lot over the last few years with COVID, inflation, etc. But for the theatre and our other buildings, as I mentioned, we're working on a capital project. When I came into post, people mentioned the capital project all the time and said, well, like the foyer doors, we'll wait until we do the capital project. We don't want to do that yet because we'll be wasting money. Well, I've been in post now for over 4 years, and whilst we are progressing towards the capital project, realistically, it won't be for another 5+ years. So I'm mindful that we can't just hold off on essential works, and we need to keep going, and we need to assign that money, which the building deserves. So things like the roof repairs, the foyer doors, which were been left because we felt we would do them during the capital project, have now been done. So as I say, we're making small baby steps, but we're gradually getting towards a situation where we're being proactive and more strategic in our planning of the maintenance works. Next slide, please. So I just put this one in at the end. We are situated near the Edinburgh Castle, some amazing views from the roof. And one of the positive things we've been doing as an organisation, and this is really down to the staff, is we had beehives on the roof. We've got more hives. And as you can see in the image, we've started planting up there. We're growing flowers for the bees. We're trying to help from a sustainability perspective. But for me, one of the great things is a lot of the staff don't have gardens within Edinburgh, so they can go up there and they can get their hands dirty. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Fiona. That was absolutely fascinating, and so good to hear how you have gone from that kind of the wheelie bin collecting rainwater strategy that was in place before you started at the Royal Lyceum to that proactive strategy where works are actually are happening. And as you say, that the challenge that you have faced with theatre buildings, where quite often people wait for that capital works project, which is so far down the line, but actually trying to put some of those measures in place beforehand. It feels like it's a strategy that is really working at the Royal Lyceum. So thank you so much for that. Right, I can see that there are questions going into the chat already, which is fantastic. Do keep on putting your questions in the chat. We will get to them at the end. But before that, I'd like to introduce our final speaker, who is Andrew Roberts from Theatre Clwyd, which is based in Mold in North Wales. Andrew is the Finance, Operations and People Director and has worked at the theatre there for almost 10 years, which coincidentally is about how long I've been working at Theatres Trust as well, Andrew. And one of the first site visits I undertook was to Theatre Clwyd. That was obviously before the major capital works project, which you have been undertaking. And Theatres Trust was lucky enough to visit the building and the new works only last month and to see those results. And it really is looking fantastic. I think those new works have really embraced the building's spectacular setting, but also kind of retained the heart of the original theatre. So it's a fantastic balance and very wonderful results. Andrew's going to talk about managing a building during a capital works project, the temporary village that was created to keep the theatre open during that time, and the maintenance plan that was developed for that phase. Also how he prepared for the move back into the building. So over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Claire, and good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for the invitation for Theatre Trust for me to come and talk to you this afternoon on creating a theatre maintenance plan. Some of the things I will touch on, Fiona has very brilliantly summarised as well. But as Claire said, my journey has been slightly different over the last few years, as we have, or very nearly reaching the end of a £50 million redevelopment of our building in North Wales. So I joined the organisation nearly 10 years ago in a newly formed role as Director of Operations, which is amalgamation of the former General Manager and the Theatre Manager. And similar to Fiona, it was to give focus at a senior level to many aspects of the building and the theatre operations. Back then, we were local authority owned and run. So we were employees of Flintshire County Council, and we think we were the last producing theatre to be owned and run solely by a local authority. And we've now moved out of that ownership, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. When I joined the organisation, it was clear there had been no investment in the facility for over 20 years. The focus had been very much around theatre making, and the money had been spent on staging and creating some incredible pieces of theatre, but the building was not fit for purpose, and there absolutely wasn't any comprehensive maintenance plan. It was very ad hoc, it was very reactive, and there was no sinking fund. So things were going wrong on a daily basis. And it was, as Fiona said, very big sticking plasters waiting to see what will happen next. Also, roles and responsibilities were very, very unclear. It sat with really one person. They've been with the organisation a significant long time, and therefore that was a risk to the company that knowledge was held with that one person. And the building had reached its end of life. So when I arrived, the narrative was quite clear. Theatre Clwyd either needs to be redeveloped or it will close, because it was becoming a very, very challenging building to run. And in many areas, it was unsafe, and we were having to keep rooms closed because they just weren't able to be accessed by people. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to flick through a couple of slides just to show the condition of the building when I arrived: seating, electrics, ventilation, theatre lighting, and also ceilings. Some of those images probably a lot of you on this call today can relate to, but it was clear something had to be done because it was a significant, challenging building to operate. So a bit of a pre-project reality check. Where were we at? What's the state of the nation? There was minimal documentation of building systems. More concerningly, supplier relationships were inconsistent. There was a very small supplier chain who were brought in to do a wide variety of building maintenance. We didn't have a team on staff that would be able to do a lot of those tasks. There was no value for money, value engineering, or any review about that maintenance and those plans. It was very much pick the phone up, get somebody in, get the job done, and move on. And as I said earlier on, the knowledge around the staff team was concentrated on individuals, and those processes weren't documented or followed. So in effect, we entered survival mode. This was the phase between me arriving and the knowledge that Theatre Clwyd needed, and at this point would be going through a major capital redevelopment. Bearing in mind, this goes back to 2018. Next slide, please. So a little bit of a journey of our capital project. So we had a feasibility study in 2017, and we moved into REBA Stage 3 in 18-19, and REBA Stage 4 in 2019-2020. My role as Director of Operations, I became the client rep for the project back in 2018, and that's a role I've seen through over the last 7 years. Construction was due to start in 2020, but of course, dratted COVID delayed and changed an awful lot of things in our world, and it delayed the actual build until 2023. The build should have finished in 2024. It should have finished in spring of 2025, and now we're waiting, hopefully, for practical completion in just a few weeks' time. During all of that journey as well, in 2021, as I said earlier on, Theatre Clwyd became independent of a local authority. So we set up a charitable trust, trading arms. So as well as thinking about the capital project, we also had to consider, where do our maintenance plans sit within a whole new governance structure, a whole new procurement framework. So it was challenging, but it created lots of opportunity for us to really think about how we go about our maintenance in the short term and in the long term. Next slide, please. So it was always agreed that as part of our redevelopment, and this was even before COVID, that we would not close our building at any point in its entirety. There were at the time over 130 company members working here. We needed to remain and hold on to those individuals and those skills. But more importantly, we needed to keep people coming up our hill to see the work that we are producing. So we created a temporary village. I say temporary, it was with us for over 3.5 years. And you can just see a couple of aerial shots there of it next to our building. So it was a marquee which provided our front of house spaces. Some of you may have heard of the Mix Theatre, something that we hired for 3 years, 250-seat end-on performance space, which worked brilliantly for small-scale visiting work and also some of our smaller-scale produced work. We also had green room facilities, dressing rooms, showers, public toilets, and at the same time ensuring that all of that was made as accessible as we possibly can. And you can just see a couple of the slides inside as well of that finished project. So we moved away from the building as we knew it and into this phase of capital redevelopment and how we maintain those temporary structures. A lot of my team laughed and said it's not temporary, it's here for a very, very long time, which is very true. But we had to deal with it in that way. There was little money available during the capital redevelopment for repairs and maintenance because a lot of the structures were leased or hired. So we had to have strong relationships with those suppliers to ensure that they are maintained. And those of you know that a geographical location of this cleared on a hill, it can get very, very windy very, very quickly up here. So it's also making sure that those facilities remain safe and we could open them as much as we possibly could during adverse weather. So during the temporary phase, it allowed us to consider how we would approach the maintenance plan as we move back into our redeveloped building. And as I said earlier on, our approach historically was reactive and problem solving. There was limited knowledge and absolutely minimal documentation. And where I feel we're moving to as an organisation is a proactive plan tied to the capital life cycle. As I say, we're very fortunate that we have gone through this capital redevelopment. And it's really given us an opportunity to think about what we wanted to include within the capital project. Initially, the mechanical engineering side of the building, as I say, was deemed end of life. They were quoting figures of 16 to 20 million pounds just to bring that element of the building up to date. That wouldn't change how the building looked or felt, and it was clear that funders would not be interested in purely a mechanical and engineering refurbishment of our building. We need centralized documentation. I'm able to do that coming out of the project through the warranties and the schedules of maintenance and the operations and manuals. And also we need to define roles and responsibilities. And this comes back to a point that Fiona also made earlier on, that it doesn't just need to sit in one area. There needs to be a general understanding and a broader acceptance of where these roles and where these tasks sit to continually maintain a building of our size. Next slide, please. So here's just a couple of things that we've considered as we built our new maintenance plan. We've looked at the assets, both the kit that we've kept during the capital redevelopment, but also new plant and machinery that has been installed as part of that project, and developed our maintenance schedules, whether that's daily, weekly, monthly. Just need to ensure that those cycles are there. The equipment is being considered, maintained as per its warranties, and also who was responsible for those. We've taken a lot of time to look at our suppliers, to look at our local supplier base and work with some smaller companies, ensuring that we don't necessarily go to those big contractors, and we have 2 or 3 smaller companies who can really specialize in electrics, plumbing, to support that work. Budgets and forecasting. Again, Fiona's touched on that reactive budget, but also some of those bigger sinking fund elements. Lots and lots of training, both on systems, but also awareness of how the building operates. The fundamental change to this building is a lot to do with environmental. We've gone 100% gas free. Introducing air source heat pumps is just one thing that, again, the wider company need to understand how those things work. And finally, emergency protocols. So what happens if something does go wrong, and how do we put it right, and how do people feel empowered to do that within their roles? Next slide, please. Of course, there are still challenges that we will face. Resource, both financial and human. There's not an infinite pot of money, and there's not an infinite amount of resource, but we need to apply it in a sensible way and be pragmatic about that. Continually training company members, our staff, so that both new and existing team members understand the challenges are and what they are responsible for. We need to balance that with flexibility, and we need to integrate that maintenance plan around the programming and the building. We will be, when we fully open in a couple of months' time, be open 362 days a year. So how do we allow scheduled maintenance to happen when lots of the building is active and has public and staff within it most days of the year? Next slide, please. So, in summary, why a maintenance plan matters to us or to any of us, we need to ensure its safety, longevity, and the performance of the facilities. It definitely helps with budgeting. It needs to support artistic excellence. Fiona touched on this as well. Without a building, we can't create the work that we need to do and welcome people through our doors. And also, it demonstrates stewardship to funders and stakeholders. So, if we want to go out for future funding, whether that's capital or whether that's revenue, we need to show our commitment to the building. And a maintenance plan fundamentally for us is not just a document, it needs to be an organisational commitment to that piece of work. Next slide, please. And there we go. So just to see a little glimpse of the Theatre Clwyd building when it reopened this first phase just over a month ago. With a couple of little snippets of the inside. As I say, full practical completion on the building is due in just about 3 weeks' time, and we hope to have the full building open to the public by 1st of September.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew. And it was really interesting hearing you and Fiona talk about kind of the real need for that maintenance plan, the real planning ahead, but also kind of defining the roles and responsibilities and making sure that people really know about their building and know about those systems. So lots of food for thought there. I can see, again, there's lots of messages coming into the chat there. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for giving up their time and sharing their knowledge and experience for this important topic. I'm just going to pause to allow the recording to stop.